Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Empowering Voices. Today, our special guest is a special person from all over from Canada. You cannot believe it. It's so far away, but we are so close because all her story resonates with me and for sure with many of us out there. Welcome, Candice. We are very happy to have you, and we will dive in straight away. Everyone knows that we start the conversation with one of the words that I embroider on the pieces. We have, for those of you who are watching and are lucky to watch the video, we chose determination today. I just remind everyone that you can, after the episode, not before that, you can jump on my website and check my pieces. But now let's start knowing you better and understanding why determination resonates with you.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me on your show today. I'm stoked to be here. Determination is kind of what I feel like was a driving force for sure in my life. Anybody who's read my story, and I'm sure we'll go through a bit of it here, there were a lot of things that happened that I didn't necessarily plan for, and it took a certain determination, a decision, more than anything, to not give in to what had happened, to not give up who I believed I was. And I was often called stubborn throughout my life. And I usually came back with this, a smart quote and said, actually it's determination. I'm sure of where I'm going. I'm sure of who I am. And if I got to be a little sassy to get there, thank you very much. And of course, before the 2020, when I finally did a lot of the healing work to be able to talk about my story in its fullness without any sort of negative kickback from myself, that was certainly something that, I wasn't talking about. So they didn't know that there was an underlying determination, which I think is true for a lot of people who are dealing with some sort of trauma. There's an internal voice calling, drive that sort of keeps us moving through it, right? If you're going through hell, just keep on going.
A voice screaming most of the time. Unfortunately, not always we feel determined enough to follow that voice.
Yes, exactly. So I was just...
So we are happy that you followed the voice.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and you are here to tell us what happened and how you did it.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah. So when I was 17, I was sexually assaulted by my boyfriend. So that was my first experience with gaslighting, manipulation, that sort of thing. And to be honest, before he'd even come to see me, so he actually came from Scotland, interestingly enough. I'd met him when I was overseas, and I just wasn't familiar with it. So even though my gut, right, the niggle, as I would call it, was going off, that something wasn't quite right, and I didn't quite feel comfortable. And even though I was excited and thought I was in love and all these sorts of things, I've learned when you hear the niggle or feel the niggle, that sense inside that something isn't quite right. You should just listen to it, even if you don't know why, because usually there isn't a logical reason immediately. It's something that, your subconscious is, cluing you into that something's not quite right. So that I actually endured 2 years of that because I wasn't sure, had never been empowered to communicate that I was uncomfortable with somebody. And it's hard to do, right? If well, he says he loves me and all this other stuff.
Yeah, even you feel guilty. You say,
yes,
come on, he loves me. He's there for me. Why do don't I feel fine?
Yeah, that sort of thing. And, lots of different gaslighting techniques of, well, if everybody else is doing it, why shouldn't I? And all these other things. So, yeah, so 2.5 years into it, I finally found the courage to get out. Did not do it gracefully, but I feel like I stumbled out of that relationship. However, then I stumbled right into another one. Because of course I hadn't dealt with the issue now that I didn't have.
You just knew that it was something was wrong, but you couldn't understand where.
Well, I was so uncomfortable with, I didn't want to be doing those things. I wanted to wait. I wanted to get to know him better. Like any of those things. I was pretty young. He was 24.
17. Come on.
Yeah, I wasn't ready. And so he would say, okay, fine, we won't. And then, it would happen again. And I think the biggest challenge for me was before that, I had been focused very much on my schooling, on traveling, I had grown up in a fairly conservative farming town. And so I had done a lot of things, but I hadn't had a lot of experience with boys. And that was on purpose. I remember saying, I'm going to focus on getting good grades.
Yeah.
I wanted to graduate. And so I just hadn't spent a lot of time really understanding what I was getting into. And the only, boys I knew my dad and my grandpa. And so they behaved themselves.
Yeah, exactly. It was a totally different approach and relationship.
Totally. Yeah, totally. So that was challenging. One of the things that was the most discouraging for me was, anytime that we were, confronted that, my parents were concerned that something was going on too late, behind closed doors, he would always blame me, which was always fascinating for me now looking back on it.
Of course,
back at the time I was like, what do you mean it's my fault? Like, no, I'm not the one. I'm not interested at all. And I didn't know how to stand up and say, he's lying. Like, how come you love me? And then he'd say he was sorry. And anyway, it was a very interesting experience.
Also, there's always a bit of worry that you hurt also your family, your parents, because again, deep inside you knew that there was something wrong. So you didn't want to give them the pain to feel that.
Exactly. Yeah. And, years later, when I did finally tell them, there was a lot of pain, and they were mostly sad that I didn't find the courage to tell them so that they could have done something to, ask him to leave or protect me or something. And I was like, I didn't know how to talk about it. Like I'd been, totally embarrassed to talk about it. And there's no words to talk about it. So I think that's one of the reasons why I want to tell my story so plainly now, is so that if somebody is listening, they know that there is no shame in it. And the only one who was doing any sort of guilt or shame was definitely me. The voices in my head were way worse than anybody has said then or since.
Yeah, of course. And also the people who love you just want you to feel happy. Yeah, whatever is the choice you take. And I mean, they were accepting probably the relationship because you chose to have the relationship, not because they were over happy. So it's always but as you say, you need courage, and it's almost a paradox. You need to find courage to become happy. What does it mean? But you are entangled in such a reality where you are manipulated all the time. So not easy, definitely. Yeah, been there, done that.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's something else that your listeners need to know, is there's a lot of us that have that story, even the ones that aren't ever going to talk about it. And that's been overwhelming to me, almost on one side in a good way, that I'm like, wow, there is such a movement of us who have more compassion than you can possibly imagine if you're someone who's struggling to tell the story or ask for help. And on the other side, it's overwhelming to me that it is this much of a problem, and how much more so do we have to start talking about those things that are uncomfortable, so that it doesn't continue into the next generation, right? So that my daughter, I was a 7-year-old, almost 7, and she is, man, that girl can say no like nobody's business. And I don't want to break her of that. I'm like, if she's not comfortable, she tells you. And I'm like, good for you. You still have to go brush your teeth. But,
but you're happy that she's stubborn. I mean, instead of seeing it as a negative, actually, it's, as you said, the stubborn, it's determination. It's to be determined and have clear ideas.
Yes. And, I've told her, I said, you're welcome to say no to anybody if you're uncomfortable, including me. And I said, now that being said, I am your mother, and there are certain people in your world who have your best interests at heart. However, if something makes you uncomfortable, those people will listen to why you're uncomfortable, and you need to talk about it. And of course, she doesn't know what's happened, but I do want to now already instill this ability to conversation, because I'm sure if I'd had the courage to say, what are you doing?
But firm and convinced that you were
enough, to have the conversation. And I didn't even know how to say that to someone. And to be honest, that not wanting to make people uncomfortable is like a theme throughout all of the relationships, whether it was bad business dealings, friendships that I felt like were very rooted in gossip or guilt, because women are really good at that, or any of the negative boyfriends that I picked, is they said something and I was uncomfortable. And rather than say, I'm uncomfortable with that, I need a minute
Yeah.
Let me figure out what I want to do moving forward. Because that's the thing. When somebody makes a decision to do something, to say something, to be somebody, you get the right and the decision to take as long as you want to figure out how you want to respond to that. And that was something that a friend said when I discovered that my partner, the one who left me with $350,000 worth of debt, I discovered this when he cheated on me.
Little,
right? Yeah. Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
And I remember when I found out that he had cheated on me and I was uncomfortable with this and he wanted me to just take him back and get over it. And it was a one-time thing. And she said to me, look, if you're uncomfortable, regardless of whether or not you take him back, you can be uncomfortable for as long as you want to. That's your right. He made a decision. You get to be dealing with it however you want to. He doesn't get to give you any guilt. You get some time to figure out what you want to do. And when you know what you want to do, regardless of whether that's stay with him or move on, you make that decision entirely for you. And it was probably the best advice that I had gotten, and certainly advice I used when I was going to leave my marriage, because I went, okay, so now I know I want to leave my marriage. I'm going to figure out when is good for me and how do I want to do that and what does it look like. Do I want to stay but have a different kind of relationship anyway? And so I like to talk about that for women, because sometimes when you're realizing you do need to make a change, you don't have to make it today. Making
exactly, because that makes it's so scary.
Yes.
Because to say, okay, now I leave this relationship, I will be sleeping under a bridge, or what do I do with my children? All these, it's so overwhelming that you postpone the decision, but it's just a procrastination. But if you think, you are totally right, I so much agree with you. If you give yourself the time, you will take the responsibility of your choice, whatever it will be, but you need your time. And for everyone is different. We cannot rush it. Absolutely not.
So that's something I'm really passionate about telling people. In the example of my marriage, when I realized I needed to leave, I was 6 days after my daughter had been born. I moved into the spare room to get some space. And I remember thinking, the monkeys were not being kind to me, right? That I couldn't make another relationship work, and my past had followed me yet again into another relationship. But I remember standing in front of the mirror and looking at myself and saying, okay, you're going to leave. I don't know when, but we're going to make a better relationship. But before we do that, I'm going to lose 50 pounds because I don't feel good right now. And how am I going to care for this beautiful, tiny human and myself, and potentially, right, have to work more, right? So I don't have to live under a bridge, right? That sort of thing. All of these things that came with that little determination, decision that I wanted better and more, was a big deal. And I went, we're going to do that first. And a lot of people, thought it was a procrastination. Well, now you should just leave. And I was like, I'm not ready to leave yet. I was like, I'm not ready to stand in that decision. I've made the decision. When I'm ready, I'll do it. And losing, the weight was really just about me starting to take care of myself, because of course I've been putting everybody else first, right? And it was so much easier to make decisions once I was feeling better about myself. And then of course inspired me to drink more water and get out of the house more. And there were so many really good decisions that came. I made the really big decision, but I sort of avoided it until it was totally time to do it. And it was actually 2.5 years later that I finally sat him down. I was very calm. It was very quiet. And I just said, I've made this decision. And I think, I made it a long time ago. And now we're here. And what do we want to do? And I remember thinking, that's the way you do it.
You were pleased with yourself.
I was very pleased with myself. Yes. Because of course, we had this beautiful girl.
Yeah.
And, so we've been able to be team Inara, right? To try to manage that. And have we done that well? Not all the time, not even close. But I remember feeling like when I walked out of the house, I wouldn't be walking back in, and I would be walking out into my future. I had a plan. I had money put away. I had, I was set to make that decision and show my daughter that it's possible to make decisions. If you realize you've made a wrong one, just make the switch.
Yeah, but it's so important that you felt ready, because I was watching this Netflix series. Anyway, the statistic is that women who decide to leave a relationship go back at least 8 times, even abusive, where they are abused physically, emotionally, everything, 8 times.
That's
It's
crazy.
a lot.
That's
Because
a lot.
again, it's a lot, but it's a lot not in a negative way. It's a lot because they were not ready. As you said, they didn't give themselves the time to get ready. They thought that the decision taken, you have to act. That's not true, because it's also a healing process. You need to find yourself first before you can step out of that door and decide not to come back.
Absolutely. And it's not easy, right? And there were tears, and there's like it's such a big deal.
Of course.
And I think I didn't want to make the decision because I was upset. I also didn't want to wonder in the back of my mind if I could have done something to save the relationship, you know.
Exactly.
Right. And I think that drives a lot of people. And so for me, staying as long as I needed to make sure that I had done as much as I possibly could on my end, to be like, yes, I have done everything I possibly can to bring this relationship to this space, and then I'm going to go. And
but was he surprised?
I think he was surprised I actually left.
Yeah, not with the decision, but with the action.
Yes, the action was definitely surprising, and then how organized I was when I left. He's like, "Wow, you really have been playing this for a while," and I kind of felt like saying, "Duh." Like when your partner moves into the spare room and says she needs some time, that's when you sit down and you start to have some conversations. And I think, you know, I had just done it. I hadn't done it in a malicious way. I kind of knew, you know, even though the relationship had some, what I would call fairly narcissistic and abusive spaces to it, financially for sure. I remember thinking it's going to be hard leaving, but what I'm living currently is also hard.
Yeah.
Like very hard. And I didn't want that for her, and I didn't want that for me. And I figured it's probably going to be hard to be a single mom, but I'm already living hard, right? I already have a partner who, you know, keeps track of every penny he gives me, even though I'm at home raising his child. Like, it's going to be hard counting pennies, but you're already counting your pennies. So go do it on your time.
Yeah, I
mean, go do it for you.
Funny enough, there were things that you were already doing. Some tough things that you were already doing. For sure, there were then new ones, for sure, because every change is a challenge, and it's a new life, really. But it's a new. I mean, you can count on that at least. And also, I think, of course, every woman in this situation should find this courage and determination. Of course, when children are involved, we are probably pushed even harder, because we don't want to raise them in a terrible environment, because we don't want to give them the wrong message, because it's almost genetic, no? I mean, if it happens, it will happen again, because that was the example. That is the only thing they knew for them. And it would be actually strange the other way. So, but in your case, apart all the bad relationship and the cheating and the financial abuse, the financial part was another little something really big, like a rock, that he left behind.
Yeah. $350,000 worth of not good debt either, bad debt. And, you know, that was after 4 years of being in a relationship and trusting somebody to, you know, pay their parts of the bills and that kind of stuff. And it, like you say, there was definitely a family thing, because his dad had some financial troubles. And so, you know, ladies, there was certainly some awarenesses that, you know, looking at it now, this version of Candice would be like, so if your dad has some financial troubles, how do you deal with money?
Exactly.
please do tell me, because otherwise I'm going to be left holding the bag. And I think that was the biggest challenge, was just to discover, you know, the more I discovered after he left the country and left me, and I discovered he'd had multiple mistresses over the entire time we were together. Of course, at this point, it was more like, of course he did, right? Like, there was nothing that was necessarily surprising anymore. But there was a lot of debt. And for me, there was definitely a determination at that point that I didn't want to just claim bankruptcy and some of those things. Not that I, judge anyone who does, but for me, that was not who I saw myself to be. And I said, no, I'm going to figure out how to deal with this and deal with it with as much dignity as I possibly can. Yeah. It was a real challenge to show up, really honestly, because of course, every time I was talking to somebody about it and they'd say, well, how come you don't pay your bills? And I'm like, well, actually I do. But I made a really dumb choice in partner. He's not even in the country anymore. So you have to deal with me. I apologize. How can we get through this debt? And for the most part, people really respected the way I showed up in honesty. And I think this was the first time that I realized showing up with that kind of authenticity around something that was this hard to talk about was good, because at that point I wasn't talking about any of the other sexual abuse or anything else that had happened. That was still very much, I just didn't talk about it. I didn't think about it either, to be honest. So that was a very challenging couple of years. Of course. But I paid off the debt in a couple of years less than what I was given a space to do, largely because of the determination to do so, because who I believed myself to be, which was someone who had great credit and someone who made wise financial decisions, is still who I believe myself to be. Yeah. And so that was a really interesting place to not let go of who I was, which I think I had in some of the other more negative things. I said, well, maybe I'm this person now, rather than, no, this is really dumb. The only thing I do over and over again is choose, men who sound amazing.
Yeah, like you are doomed and it has to be always like that. In reality, at a certain point, you started living the story of someone else, that someone else brought for you. But then, fortunately, something bad happened. It's strange to say, but from disruption comes creation. There's no other way. And the stronger the disruption, the bigger and more fulfilling the creation. So it is stunning, because I think most of us never saw all that money together. So to think to pay back, I mean, it can be overwhelming, scary. Incredibly. Frustrating, annoying. I mean, all the worst feelings you could feel inside of you. So to have very good ones to fight against them, you had not just determination, but determination. I mean, and you did it.
I didn't want him to win. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't. And that was the same sort of energy I remember thinking with the sexual assault and some of the other things that happened. If I didn't find the silver lining, if I didn't turn this for good in some way, then honestly, I was just mad that I was going through it. And that was worse, because then I didn't want to be angry. Right? Yeah. So I was like, how do I turn this for good? Even if nobody else benefits, how can it benefit me? What can I learn from this? And that, I think, was honestly just me looking to get through it as fast as possible and give myself something to work toward, right? Some people move toward pain and then they move through that, and some people need to move away from it. And I needed something to achieve through it. So I think especially with this financial thing, I figured, well, someday it'll be a great story. And I've often said that it'll be a great story one day. And from that, what can be done? And I mean, we've heard lots of these stories, right, where people, lost everything and then built it back. And it was usually because of a decision or determination. And so I hung on to a lot of those kinds of things, that if they could, so could I. And in the back of my mind, to be honest, I was thinking about the fact that, when I was 17, I was sexually assaulted, and I lived for 2 years in that relationship. And so it didn't really matter anything else that followed afterwards, because that was by far the worst. Yeah. And I wasn't even talking about it yet. Yeah. So I figured, if that guy can't break me, you can't either. Now, the problem was I was sort of in this, I'm very angry energy, which carried me for a number of years versus having done the healing. And I think that's the one thing I would say to myself, if I could go back, I would just ask her to slow down and find someone safe to talk about, really unpack it, really unload it. It doesn't have to define you. It can be a blip on the radar. It doesn't have to, impact anything else moving forward. Because I kind of just dragged it forward, rather than really. Well,
you pretend that
it didn't happen.
Didn't happen, but it didn't affect you that much. Yeah, it's something that happens in life, and doing like this, of course, the weight became bigger and bigger at some point, and you had to deal with it. I mean, you didn't have a choice. So after the end of the marriage, I think it was the moment to let's face everything now. Now I have to, the phoenix, I have to be destroyed completely, and I will raise again.
Yeah. And I think, I always promised myself that someday I'd take some time. In my mind, I figured I'd take 2 weeks and go in Mexico and do some kind of a yoga retreat where I, dealt with it all. Of course, that didn't happen with the pandemic.
Of course.
But it did present an opportunity where everything sort of stopped. And I realized, I have time to actually do some unpacking and some healing. And I only expected it to be a couple of weeks, but I ended up doing 14 weeks of very intensive healing. I had a therapist on Monday and a feminine balance coach on Thursday. And pretty much anybody in my network who had some kind of healing modality, I reached out to them and said, hey, I know you're not busy right now. I could use some healing. And, it was beautiful. And then when I reemerged, I felt like I was reintroducing myself to myself first and foremost. And then to the rest of the world. And it wasn't really a changing. It was more of a remembering that I didn't ever really change from who I was. I just had to get to the point where I could really forgive myself for making dumb decisions, which allowed me to then take some responsibility for who I am and where I've come from, and to then look forward and say, okay, now what? And it's been really quite beautiful since then.
To find yourself again. Because actually, I think, especially when we are teenager, it's when our personality comes out in full light and everything. Then unfortunately, bad events and bad experiences, they just put it under a big weight of whatever bad feeling you can name. And we had to find it again. I had the opportunity recently to go through, I always had the secret diary, from the age of 13 until I was 30. So for a long time. And I went through them, and it was so stunning to see how a teenager already knew exactly what she wanted, how she was. And I knew myself so well that I forgot along the way.
I love that.
It's just recently that I started discovering myself again. The second when I decided to put myself as a priority, because we become people pleasers, right? And we start giving them priority for good or for bad. And bit by bit, our personality becomes nothing. So, but it's there. This is the good news. It's there, just hiding for a while. So the second we want to recover that strong woman that we were in our teens, she's there waiting. And we should do it. I mean, probably there isn't the right time, right? Every time is the right one. But better early than never. Later than never, sorry.
Yes, absolutely. That's beautiful.
That's amazing to hear the story. First of all, it's so touching to listen to you talking about it, not without pain, because for sure, I mean, that is possibly something you cannot overcome completely ever, but you can see with the confidence and the determination to tell others, look, you are not alone, you can do it, and you can support in a way with your experience. That's great. I also normally I ask my guests if there's apart of the determination word we discussed, another word or a quote that you can tell us that it's important for you.
I think it would be, the tagline of my podcast is to trust the Niggle and tell the truth. And I like to lead people with that, because if I look back, that's really the thread that weaves through my entire life. Is I knew, right, just like you did as a teenager, who you were. I knew when it was a dumb decision. I knew they weren't good for me. I knew it wasn't the right choice for me, and I wasn't putting myself first. I didn't know how to negotiate that or navigate that. So I wasn't telling myself the truth. And so that's really where the tell the truth comes from. It's, trust the niggle. So trust yourself first and foremost.
Yes.
You are not wrong. And for a lot of us, myself included, I had never really been encouraged to listen to myself. And so that's something that I try to, preach now. Like, come on, ladies, if you know it and you do know it, even if you don't know how you know it, don't worry about the how. Just, write it down in a journal, draw it on a sticky note. Something felt off today with this person. It will reveal itself in time, and you'll be glad if your eyes are open. But then tell yourself the truth of that. So whether it's through journaling, so I also journaled. That was sort of a saving grace throughout this thing. I was at least telling myself the truth of what was going on, even if I didn't have the courage to speak it out loud to anybody for the longest time. But you got to tell yourself the truth. So I didn't immediately go and tell my husband, hey, I'm leaving you the night I made the decision. I didn't tell him that for 2.5 years, but I did tell myself the truth. Hey, you're not happy here. You actually deserve to be happy, even though I felt awful about myself because at that point all of the different abuses, and it was years, it's not just him, right? It was years of attracting people that continued to do those sorts of things. I think guilt and gossip is a language of our world. And so a lot of times I realize that people just don't realize that they're communicating with those two energies. And once you start to show it to them, they go, oh, I didn't mean it that way. You say, I know, but this is how it comes across. So ladies, we have to trust ourselves, trust that sense, and then tell yourself the truth of that. Because when you're honest with yourself, just you, that is when all of a sudden you'll start to notice solutions. You'll have another idea that sort of leads you further to, oh, that's better than this. And if you haven't listened to yourself for a long time, or you realize you've been in an unhealthy relationship, and so you've really turned off that part of yourself because it's too uncomfortable to live knowing that you're not where you could be living at your best self, you need to look for the feeling of relief. So it's not like sunshine, lollipops, and roses. It's just, it feels a little better than the other option. And just starting to put those pieces of yourself back together and telling yourself the truth of it, then 2.5 years from now, or however long it's going to take, you'll wake up and realize you've created enough of a bubble around yourself. And you can make the bigger decision. You can take that new job. You can tell your boss off. You can whatever you need to do to take yourself to the next level. But you have to do that slowly. And I want more people to know that, because I think I knew intuitively that even though it was a split-second decision, really, that got me in the mess, unfortunately, it was probably going to take some time to get myself out. And I gave myself that gift to work through that, so I don't go back 8 times. So I don't keep going backwards in the story, so that even if I'm only moving forward a teeny tiny bit every day, at least I'm moving forward. Teeny tiny. But think about it. Even if you just make one decision today, one teeny tiny decision to take care of you, and you do that every single day, then you will have made 365 really good decisions for you at the end of the year, which is way better than a couple of really big monumental decisions. So that is something I'm really passionate about leaving women with is, you really are enough, but you got to trust yourself first and tell yourself the hard truth, because from there you can make amazing changes.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I really like that you call you call it a gift. You gave yourself the time to heal yourself and take the decision and step by step get to the action. Well done. We are very, very happy for you. And I'm sure all our listeners, in a way or another, could see how important has been your journey and how important it can be for us through your story. So thanks a lot for being with us. It's been a great honor. And speak to you soon. I just remind everyone that your contact are in the post, in the bio, on YouTube, my website, everywhere. So thanks again, and bye everyone.